Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today we're tackling a document called, adoga.pdf.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it looks like it's all about modern farming techniques. So if you've ever dreamed of having a super efficient, sustainable garden, this deep dive is for you. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out with, like, a window box full of herbs.
Sounds right up my alley.
So where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, the document jumps right into this idea of modulated management, which is uh, basically all about planning and designing a system that's tailored to each specific crop.
Okay, so no more one-size-fits-all gardening advice, huh?
Right. It's about looking at the entire life cycle of the plant, from seedling to harvest, and figuring out exactly what it needs at each stage.
So it's kind of like instead of just throwing some seeds in the ground and hoping for the best, you're like creating a personalized plan for each plant.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and understanding that just like people, plants have different needs at different stages of their lives.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal. But why is this modulated management thing so important? Does it really make that much of a difference?
It can make a huge difference. Think about it. Would you feed a baby the same food as an adult?
Definitely not.
Same goes for plants. Giving them the right nutrients at the right time can significantly boost their growth and yield.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does this document suggest we go about figuring out what each plant needs at each stage?
Well, it lays out these three main pillars for successful cultivation: optimizing fertilization and nutrient supply, effective pest and disease control, and then maximizing both the quantity and quality of the harvest.
3 pillars, got it. Sounds like a pretty solid foundation for a thriving garden.
It is, and they all work together.
Let's focus on that first pillar for a second, fertilization. The document spends a lot of time on what it calls, let me see if I can pronounce this right, Teu Anisa, precision fertilization management modulation.
That's it. And, it's not just about, like, dumping a bag of fertilizer on your plants and calling it a day.
I was going to say there's got to be more to it than that, right?
Right. It's about understanding the science behind how plants actually absorb and utilize nutrients.
So it's more like we're creating personalized nutrition plans for our plants, kind of like what people do for themselves these days.
That's a great analogy. And just like with human nutrition, there are key principles to keep in mind. The document highlights the importance of timing, amount, type, and control when it comes to nutrient supply.
Okay, break that down for me. What exactly does that mean?
Sure. Basically, you need to give your plants the right nutrients in the right quantities at the right time and in a way that they can actually absorb and use them effectively.
Okay, that makes sense, but it also sounds a little complicated. Like, how do you actually put all of that into practice?
Well, that's where this concept of scheduling comes in. It's about creating a precise timeline for your crop's entire life cycle, from planting to harvest. Think of it as like a roadmap for success, detailing when to fertilize, how much to use, and even what type of fertilizer is best suited for each stage of growth.
A roadmap, huh? I like that. So instead of just kind of winging it, we're like following a carefully crafted plan.
Precisely. And you might be surprised to know that even in your home garden, you can apply these principles of modulated management to get better results from your plants.
So even if I'm not a farmer, I can still benefit from this approach.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
all about working with nature's rhythms instead of just hoping for the best.
I'm kind of digging this idea. It's like bringing some structure and predictability to a process that can often feel pretty unpredictable.
Exactly. And that's precisely what makes this approach so effective. By understanding the science behind plant growth and applying these principles of modulated management, you can essentially orchestrate your plant's development in a way that maximizes both efficiency and quality.
Okay, you've sold me on the concept, but I'm curious, does the document give us any specific examples of how this works in practice?
It does. In fact, it introduces a whole product line called ACs, the original series, which appears to be a set of liquid fertilizers designed for this modular approach.
Oh, wow. So they've taken all this science and packaged it into ready-to-use products. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. There are 5 products in the series, each targeting a specific need in the plant's life cycle. For example, they have Easy, or Original Leaf, which is high in nitrogen to encourage leafy growth.
Okay, so if I'm growing lettuce or spinach, that's the one to use.
Exactly. Or even during the early stages of growth for other plants, then they have Easy Original Fruit, which is high in phosphorus and potassium to support flowering and fruit development.
So instead of just using any old fertilizer, you'd choose one that matches your plant's current growth phase.
Exactly. It's like how doctors prescribe specific medications based on what's going on in your body.
I like how targeted that is. Okay, what about the other products in the series?
Sure. There's Abiz, or original growth, which is a more balanced formula for overall growth throughout the plant's life. And then Itze, or original essence, which is designed to support plants during stressful weather conditions, like if there's a lot of rain. And finally, there's Isen, or original calcium, to boost fruit quality and prevent problems like, blossom end rot.
Wow, they've really thought of everything. I'm starting to get a much clearer picture of how this whole modular fertilization approach works. But wouldn't this level of precision be really difficult and expensive for, like, the average farmer to achieve?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And something we can definitely dig into further as we explore the document. But the document argues that this approach, while it might require a bit more planning and knowledge up front, actually leads to higher efficiency, better yields, and lower costs in the long run.
So it's like an investment. You put in the effort up front, and it pays off later on.
Precisely. And that's what makes this approach so appealing, especially in today's world, where farmers face increasing pressure to produce more food with fewer resources, and to do it all in a way that's sustainable and doesn't harm the environment.
Right. It's like finding that sweet spot where efficiency, productivity, and sustainability all come together.
Exactly.
This is fascinating. I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. It's not just about, like, becoming a better gardener. It's about, like, shifting our whole mindset when it comes to how we interact with nature.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so we've covered the first pillar, optimized fertilization. What about that second pillar, pest and disease control? Does the document have any insights on that front?
It does. And it's actually where things get really interesting. It's fascinating, isn't it? How this modulated management thing, it really changes how we think about plants. It's less about, trying to control them and more about, like, understanding them, working with them.
Yeah, it's like going from being the bossy gardener to more of a partner, a collaborator.
Exactly. And that's where, knowledge becomes super important. The document really emphasizes this need to understand your specific crop, its ideal growing conditions, potential pests and diseases, even things like the geographic and climate conditions of your area.
So even if two people are growing the same type of plant, their approach might need to be different depending on where they live and what kind of weather they're dealing with.
Absolutely. It's all about adapting the principles of modulated management to your unique circumstances. And speaking of adapting, the document also talks a lot about the role of technology in modern agriculture.
Oh, interesting. So we're not just talking about, like, old school gardening techniques here.
Not at all. Think about all the tools and technologies we have now. Soil sensors that can tell you exactly how much moisture your plants are getting. Drones that can survey entire fields for signs of pests or disease. I mean, it's incredible.
It's like having this whole team of high-tech assistants helping you care for your plants. So how does all this technology fit into this whole modulated management approach?
Well, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of things. Like, instead of just assuming your plants need water, you can use a sensor to actually measure the moisture level in the soil and only water when necessary.
That makes a lot of sense. You're not just wasting water, and you're also preventing problems like, root rot?
Exactly. Root rot, fungal diseases, all sorts of things. And it's not just about watering either. Think about those fertilizers we talked about earlier.
Oh, right. The original series.
Yeah. The document suggests using those in conjunction with these high-tech tools to, like, really fine-tune your fertilization strategy. Imagine being able to monitor your plant's nutrient levels in real time and then adjust your fertilizer applications accordingly.
That's amazing. It's like personalized nutrition for plants taken to, like, the next level. But I gotta say, this all sounds pretty high-tech and maybe even a little intimidating, especially for someone who's just starting out with, like, a small garden.
I get it. It can seem that way. But the cool thing is that this approach can be scaled to fit your needs and resources. You don't need all the fancy gadgets to benefit from the principles of modulated management. Even something as simple as, like, keeping a detailed gardening journal, noting your plant's progress, what you're doing, how they're responding, and then adjusting your care based on your observations. That can make a huge difference.
That's good to know. So it's not just about the technology itself. It's about using whatever tools you have available to gather information and make more informed decisions about, like, how to care for your plants.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to the third element the document emphasizes: materials.
Materials.
Yeah, like everything from choosing the right soil and fertilizers to selecting appropriate pest control methods, even thinking about like the packaging you'll use for your harvest.
Okay, so it's like thinking about the entire life cycle of your plants. From the moment you plant that seed to the moment you're like enjoying the fruits or vegetables of your labor.
Exactly. And by carefully considering each of these elements, knowledge, technology, and materials, you create a system that's both incredibly effective and super adaptable.
That adaptability part seems really important, especially these days with like climate change and all these other unpredictable factors affecting how we grow things.
You're absolutely right. This modular approach gives you that flexibility to respond to challenges as they arise. Whether it's a sudden shift in weather patterns or like the emergence of a new pest in your area, you can adjust your plan as needed.
It's like having a living plan, one that's always evolving.
Exactly.
Man, this is really making me rethink how I approach my own garden. I love how thoughtful and strategic this whole approach is.
It's a shift in mindset for sure.
Okay, before we move on to that second pillar, pest and disease control, there's one more thing I wanted to touch on. The document briefly mentions organic farming practices. Why do you think they brought that up?
That's a good question. I think it's because organic farming, it actually shares a lot of the same principles as modulated management. It's all about working with nature. Understand the ecosystem, minimizing the use of synthetic inputs.
So instead of reaching for a chemical spray at the first sign of a problem, organic farming encourages you to think about what's causing that problem in the first place.
Exactly. It's about building healthy soil, promoting biodiversity, creating an environment that's naturally more resistant to pests and diseases.
Which totally aligns with that shift in mindset we were talking about earlier, moving away from a controlling approach to a more collaborative one.
Exactly. It's about working with nature, not against it.
I love that. Okay, so let's dive into that second pillar, pest and disease control. Does the document suggest a similar, I guess you could say, a similar shift in mindset when it comes to dealing with those challenges?
It absolutely does. It even uses this really interesting term. Let me see if I can remember it. USU curve, which translates to mild pest and disease control modulation. It's all about taking a proactive and preventative approach to managing these threats.
Mild pest and disease control. Okay, I'm intrigued. What does that even mean?
Well, it's kind of like what we were just talking about with organic farming. Instead of waiting for a problem to arise and then reacting with, harsh chemicals, this approach is about creating a system that's just inherently more resistant to pests and diseases.
So it's about understanding what causes those outbreaks in the first place and then addressing those factors head on.
Exactly. And it might involve things like, choosing pest-resistant crop varieties or rotating your crops to disrupt pest life cycles.
Yeah.
Or even using natural predators to control pest populations.
Got it. So it's about looking at the whole ecosystem instead of just zeroing in on individual problems as they pop up.
Exactly. And the document highlights a key concept that captures this approach perfectly. Shucho, which means prevention and treatment.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. It's like with our own health, it's always better to prevent a disease than to try and treat it after you're already sick, right?
Exactly. And just like with human health, prevention involves taking proactive steps to create a healthy and balanced environment.
So how do we actually put this mild pest and disease control approach into practice? Does the document give us any specific examples?
It does, but I think we should save that discussion for our next segment. This deep dive is getting pretty deep, and I don't want to overload everyone with too much information at once.
Good point. We want people to be able to digest all this awesome information. So let's take a pause here, and when we come back, we'll explore the practical side of mild pest and disease control. Okay, so we're back and ready to really dig into the practical side of this mild approach to pest and disease control. Where do we start?
Well, it all starts with the very foundation of your garden, choosing the right crop varieties.
Okay, so some plants are just naturally tougher than others.
Right. Some plants are just naturally more resistant to certain pests or diseases that are common in your area. It's like if you're choosing a place to live, you might want to pick a neighborhood with a low crime rate.
Makes sense. So research is key. Knowing your climate and what kind of pests are common in your area.
Exactly. And it ties back into that whole modulated management thing we've been talking about. Planning ahead.
Right. Not just planting whatever looks pretty at the garden center.
Exactly. And another thing the document highlights is crop rotation.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's a super powerful tool. Basically, by switching up what you plant in a particular spot each season, you can disrupt the life cycles of pests that target specific plants.
So if you're always moving things around, those pests won't know where to find their favorite snacks.
Right. They won't have a consistent food source, which makes it much harder for them to, establish themselves.
That's a pretty clever strategy. But let's say, despite our best efforts, some pesky bugs do show up. What then?
Well, that's where that prevention and treatment idea comes in. Remember, the document suggests incorporating natural predators into your garden.
Wait, like bringing in more bugs to fight the bad bugs?
Exactly. Like ladybugs, they love to feast on aphids, and certain birds, they can help keep those caterpillars in check.
It's like inviting the pest's enemies over for dinner.
Exactly. And it's nature's own pest control system.
Right.
Right? It's much more sustainable and often way more effective in the long run than just, like, relying on chemical interventions.
And probably a lot more fun to watch, too. I've noticed that since I've started paying more attention to my garden, I'm catching potential issues much earlier. It's like the plants are actually trying to communicate with you if you know how to listen.
Totally. That attentiveness is so key to this whole mild approach. Just taking the time to, really look at your plants, noticing subtle changes in their growth and understanding what those changes might be telling you.
Yeah.
That can help you address problems before they get out of control.
It's like becoming a plant detective, piecing together clues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the more you observe and learn, the better you'll get at, anticipating and preventing issues.
Wow, this whole deep dive has been a fantastic reminder that knowledge is power, especially when it comes to working with nature.
Couldn't agree more. The document really drives that point home, Successful cultivation, it really hinges on understanding plant physiology, their environment, the tools that are available to you.
It's like combining scientific knowledge with practical skills.
Exactly.
And it's not just about becoming a better gardener, is it? I feel like these ideas could be applied to so many other areas of life.
Oh, absolutely. This whole modulated management thing,
Yeah.
with its focus on planning and observation, adaptation, working in harmony with natural systems, it could revolutionize not just agriculture, but other fields as well.
It's being applied to like healthcare, education, even just how we manage our own lives.
Exactly. It's about embracing that mindset of continuous learning, adapting to changing circumstances, seeking out sustainable solutions.
This has been incredible. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
It's really changed the way I think about not just gardening, but like my whole approach to, well, pretty much everything.
It's a powerful way of thinking for sure.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive for today. We've unpacked those 3 pillars of successful cultivation, explored the science of precise fertilization, and we even dove into the world of mild pest and disease control.
Phew, that was a lot.
It was, but
Huh.
so worth it, and I'm sure our listeners have tons of thoughts and questions.
For sure. So what resonated with you most? What are you going to try in your own garden?
I'm really curious to hear what everyone's takeaways are. But for now, we're going to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of modulated agriculture. Until next time.